Let's discuss some fundamentals of swine nutrition and nutrient requirements. We're going to talk about what is nutrition, what is a nutrient, what are the main known nutrients for pigs, what are the requirements of these nutrients for pigs, how do we calculate these requirements, what does the 2012 NRC for swine tell us about these nutrient requirements, and how do we use the calculator that they provide. And then we'll finish up talking about water, which we often don't talk about it, and therefore we refer to it often as the forgotten nutrient. So what is nutrition? Nutrition is a science, and it studies the nourishing and the biological functions of nutrients, as well as other dietary substances in relationship to the maintenance and the productive functions of animals, which includes growth, reproduction, and other biological processes. We can also say that nutrition encompass a series of processes by which an organism takes and assimilates food. And here specifically we're talking about the digestive process itself. And then those nutrients, like we mentioned before, are used for two main purposes. One is maintenance, which includes running the basic metabolism, ensuring the health of the animals, and all the necessary metabolic activities to sustain life, and then whatever is left from those processes needed to sustain life, those are the nutrients that are used for productive purposes like growth, reproduction, and milk production. We also talk about metabolism. Metabolism is basically how does the body assimilate those nutrients. Once those nutrients are taken up by the body, how the body utilizes those nutrients in different tissues in order to be able to use them for metabolic purposes. Nutrition involves more than simply talking about nutrients and nutrient requirements and digestion. It also involves about chemical analysis of the ingredients that we're going to use to formulate the feeds, as well as the nutrient profile of the formulated diets. We also deal with estimating what are the different requirements for the different nutrients at the different physiological stages of pigs. It's not the same thing. A pig that is still lactating, that one that is newly weaned, that a pregnant sow or a lactating sow or a boar, they will have different needs for nutrients. We also talk about the effect of nutrients when they are in low quantities, and that's what we call a deficiency, or when those nutrients are provided in excess. And neither the deficiencies nor the excess of nutrients are beneficial to the animal. Up to a certain point, and we'll see it later on in the talk, the animal has a greater ability to deal with a little bit of excess than with some of the deficiencies. Finally, in nutrition, we also talk about a lot of dietary supplements or feed additives, and we can talk about antibiotics, feed additives, enzymes, mold inhibitors, probiotic, prebiotic, different types of enzymes, sequestering agents, phytochemicals, and a whole bunch more. Finally, in nutrition, we also deal with the part that does the feed processing. It's important to know what is the density of the different ingredients, what is the particle size that we're going to use for the different ingredients, how those different particle size are going to mix, how homogeneous that mixture is going to be, and then are we going to subject the feed or the ingredients to any fermentation or extraction procedure? Are they oxidized? Have we used any antioxidants? And then finally, how are we going to manufacture that feed? Is it simply going to be grinded up and mixing, or are we also going to use some heat treatment in the form of pelleting, extrusion, or something else? We define a nutrient as any chemical compound or also an element, a chemical element that is needed to run metabolic processes or metabolic reactions. What is an essential nutrient? An essential nutrient is that nutrient that must be provided in the diet because the pig in this case does not have the ability to produce enough of that nutrient using its endogenous metabolic processes to cope with the needs for maintenance and or growth or any other productive trait. And finally, we talk about some nutrients that we call them conditionally essential. In this case, a particular nutrient, in this case, we're going to use arginine as an example. Arginine, it's required in the diet in young pigs because they cannot produce enough arginine. As the pig matures, then the pig has the ability to increase its ability to produce enough endogenous arginine from other amino acid sources, and therefore arginine is no longer an essential amino acid in this case. So in young pigs, arginine would be an essential amino acid, and in older pigs, it will not be considered an essential amino acid, and that's the definition of a nutrient that will be conditionally essential. The main nutrient groups, we have them represented here. First and foremost is water. And then water is that nutrient that we forget all the time to talk about it, and we'll dedicate the later portion of this talk to talk about water. The other main nutrients are carbohydrates, whether they're structural or non-structural, proteins and amino acids, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. And these are generally considered the main nutrient groups. There may be some others there, but these are particularly the main nutrient groups that we deal in nutrition. When we talk about nutrients for swine, we can divide those into macrominerals, trace minerals, vitamins, fatty acids, and others, and then we'll see the amino acids up in the next slide. The difference between the macrominerals and the trace minerals is pretty much sort of an artificial delimitation or differentiation based on the amount of minerals that a pig requires on a daily basis. For the trace minerals, it's important to point out here the case of selenium. Selenium is regulated in most countries around the world with a level of supplementation of 0.3 parts per million. This is because selenium, it is a required nutrient for pigs, but excess of selenium can cause toxicity. The line between having enough and having a little bit of excess and getting into toxicity is not as wide as for most other nutrients, and that is the main reason why the supplementation of selenium is regulated in most countries around the world. In the case of amino acids, like we mentioned before, we basically have three categories. Those are essential, or those that must be provided in the diet. Those are dispensable, and those are the ones that the animal, the pig, does not need, as long as there is enough organic nitrogen provided in the diet or enough protein provided in the diet. And in the middle, we have this category of conditional amino acids, like we mentioned before with the example of the arginine. Those amino acids that we see over there on the slide with the red asterisks, those are the ones that are commercially available. And we can purchase those in crystalline or purified form, and therefore those are the amino acids where we can do a much better job at formulating those, because by having crystalline amino acids, we have the ability to adjust each one of those amino acids individually from each other. A nutrient requirement is defined as the amount of that particular nutrient that is needed by a pig in a period of 1 day, and is needed for the proper maintenance functions, which is to keep life going, as well as any other biological functions. We usually determine these requirements in amounts of nutrients that are needed to avoid deficiency. So when we talk about nutrient requirements, we're basically talking about the minimum amount that is needed to avoid a deficiency. It's not the same thing to talk about a nutrient requirement that a recommendation. And a nutrient requirement may not be necessarily the same to maximize growth as to maximize lean growth or milk production or immune system function or any of those. Those requirements could be different depending on what is the outcome that we're looking at. In general terms for pigs, nutrient requirements are mainly driven by the maintenance or that initial component that needs to be fulfilled in order to sustain life. And then whatever is left can be used for productive traits like we mentioned several times, like growth, lean deposition, milk production, gestation, reproductive functions, and other ones. And as anticipated, the nutrient requirements in pigs and in many other animals are affected by the environment, whether if it's too hot, if it's too cold, and there's too much humidity, not enough ventilation, there's crowding, there's not enough sunlight or light. The management style, the design of the pens, the floor space per pig. I mean, all those part of the environment can have an effect. Gender is not the same thing if we're talking about castrated males versus intact males versus females. They'll have different growth curves. The presence or absence of disease will obviously have an impact. And the obvious one here that we have not talked about it's genetics. As you change the genetics of your animals, then you change their potential and their ability to grow and give you other productive traits, and that will definitely affect the requirement of nutrients. Nutrients are expressed in units of mass per day. So the examples are either grams per day, milligrams per day, or micrograms per day. Why do we do this? Because the pigs eat a certain amount of feed, and then they will gain a certain amount of weight. So all of these, it's a mass balance, and we do it on a daily basis in order to simplify things. We never express the nutrient requirements as a percent of the feed. We never do that. But then why do we use percentages all the time, and why when we formulate feeds, it's always in percentage in the feed? So that is because it's the way we formulate, and it's the way we formulate because once we know what is the amount of a nutrient that is needed, then the next thing that we'll need to know is what is the expected or anticipated feed intake, and then we'll put the amount of that nutrient that is needed in relationship to the amount of feed that the pig is going to consume, and then in order to express that, we tend to express them in a percentage form in the diet. But the animals, the pigs, they do require amounts per day, not percentages per day. Let's review a little bit what we have talked about. How will you define nutrition? We try to define nutrition here, and we can say that it's a science that coordinates the nutrient needs of animals, in this case the pig, with the availability of nutrients in different ingredients. So, what is a nutrient? A nutrient, it's a chemical element or an organic element, could be an inorganic element, but is a chemical element that is involved and it's needed for metabolic processes. And then we can ask, can you name the main nutrient groups? I hope water was the first nutrient group that you mentioned, and after that we have carbohydrates, amino acids, lipids, vitamins, and minerals.